Welcome, everybody. Super excited to be back with you all again today. As you all know, Lonnie and I decided to take this super cool adventure to create like these video log podcast type things for this new podcast title that we put out there, Uncovering the Hidden Curriculum of DRK-12 Awards. And last time, for our first episode, we decided to do the post-panel pop-off. We gave some insight and information that we've had based off of our experiences as reviewers for multiple NSF panels, and gave all kinds of tips and tricks on how to think about structuring your DRK-12 award if you want to ensure that you're putting forward as best of a quality or as highest of a quality proposal possible.
Yep.
And today we have something even more exciting. Well, I don't know. Is it technically exciting because of the
title? It's real.
It's real.
It's a very real topic that I don't think gets talked about enough in academia. In academia, we're sort of socialized to toot our horns and, flex and stuff.
Yes.
And I know that when I was coming up as a junior person, like it was kind of pre-social media days, rejection wasn't talked about a lot. You talk about it with your close friends, but it was sort of like more of a hidden thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was easy to get the impression that those senior scholars that you looked up to just had it all figured out, had the system wired, and just knew how to play the game. And it was only like folks like me who were young, who didn't know the rules, weren't playing right, who were getting the rejections. And that's just not the case, right? We know that, like, I don't remember the statistic off of, we probably said it last time, the statistic of how many proposals get rejected, but rejection is absolutely a part of the game. And so I think this is like a more sensitive but very real topic. So we wanted to kind of, in the spirit of normalizing rejection, we wanted to talk about it, and we wanted to talk to each other about our experiences with rejection. We also, this is a first for our podcast thing, which is, I think, the appropriate name for what this is.
Yes.
We also interviewed some of our colleagues about their experiences with rejection. So it's not just the Lonnie and Terrell show.
Yes. So for episode 2, we are featuring, drum roll please, responding to rejection.
Did I say all that before you title dropped?
You did, but it's okay, because I think that was a really good preface. Like, we don't talk about rejection. Cool. People do think that the senior scholars, y'all are superstars. Like, senior scholars are superstars. Don't get me wrong. Every time I go to a professional conference, it's like, oh my gosh, is that so-and-so? But, as a graduate student or even as an early career professional, you do feel like you always have to be on, like constantly on. There's no way possible that you could not do well. Otherwise, it's like, well, in this competitive academic game, do I actually stand a chance? Do I actually have a voice? Do I actually have a credible idea?
Exactly. Is my work...
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I remember the existential thing of like, is my work even like valuable? Because you spend so much time, putting stuff together, and that feeling of rejection can be so devastating, especially when you don't have a long history of like, this is just the cycle. Go ahead, Terrell. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, it makes me think about how, like, in social media land, they'll be like, Beyonce is always on point. Because like every time you see her, Beyonce is like flawless. But I'm pretty sure that those who know her intimately will say that she has her moments too, right?
Well, that was what was kind of cool about that documentary that they made of her playing Coachella. I don't remember what the name of it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, it was on Netflix. I don't remember the name
and
either.
And she just Beyonce like had to lose baby weight. Like, that's
hard to believe, right?
Hard to believe, because she is so flawless in performance. Yeah, so I think the Beyonce, I mean, I don't know if we can compare anybody to Beyonce, but you know, the superstar kind of
Yes.
front is a good comparison.
Yes. And speaking of superstars, even though I know that we have two phenomenal people that we interviewed, we have our own superstar here, Dr. Lonnie Horn, who has had
Oh,
experiences.
I that's embarrassing, Terrell, but thank
What, to
you.
call you a superstar? To say that you had experiences?
Well, I've had experiences. No, the praise I have a hard time with, but
Oh,
thank you.
gosh.
And yes, I've had a lot of experiences with rejection. And as Terrell and I were kind of preparing for this episode, um, I was thinking about my most recent one, which actually was in DRK-12. The grant that I have currently, which is called Teaching Amidst Uncertainty,
Mhm.
I had submitted it for the first time. It had been kind of mostly well reviewed, but rejected ultimately.
Mm.
And so I revised it pretty substantially. Like, I mean, the core idea was the same, but I really built out on it. And, you know, I was obviously pretty bummed when it didn't get funded the first time, but I really like it barely phases me sometimes. Like, unless there's like a really unfair review that makes me feel like, oh, they didn't get it. But then if somebody misread a proposal that badly, I think to myself, what did I not do to communicate once I get over my initial? But it wasn't that situation at all. It was the questions were good. And so I ended up talking to a program officer. I ended up building out my team more so that we can take on more of an ambitious research topic and set of questions. So and now we're doing it. We got funded the second time we submitted it, and we've got a great team, loving the work, even though with this crazy pandemic, any research is harder. But
Yeah, that's true.
anyway, so that's my most recent rejection experience. How about you, Terrell?
So I think about this one NSF proposal that I submit, and spoiler alert, it wasn't DRK-12. So if you need to boo me right quick, that's okay.
No, no, no. It's okay. It's okay to go to different directorates.
Yes, but interestingly enough, it was a project that we had submitted for 3 times, and all 3 times it got rejected. And
Mm.
each time it was one of those things where it was like, it was a, I guess I can say it, it was an STEM grant. And for those who aren't familiar with STEM, that particular directorate provides scholarship to students, particularly in like their sophomore to junior and senior year in STEM spaces. And you're also supposed to design curriculum around some programming that can be institutionalized, that can then
It's for
support,
undergrads, right?
yes, for undergraduate
Yeah,
students,
yeah,
to help
yeah.
improve retention and matriculation and persistence and things of that nature. And so we had this really amazing idea, because I mean, of course, all of us have amazing ideas, and our ideas are never flawed, right? Uh, but we
Oh
had this
well.
really amazing idea, and put it out there the first time, got really good feedback. Wasn't funded, so we came back to the drawing board based off of the feedback, was trying to be intentional in what we did differently versus what we
Uh,
kept the same, because
yeah.
we knew, or at least the lead PI knew, I was junior at the time. The lead PI had shared some really key information in that your panel is always different. And so you really never know like
Right.
which panel may respond to what things.
That's
Uh,
right.
and so because we believed in our idea heavily, we kept a lot of the original material. We just made some small modifications, submitted it the second time, and then boom, rejected again. So it
Ah,
was like, well,
ouch.
that hurt. Uh,
Uh-huh.
Same process though, took some time to really think through it as a team, kind of talk about what we felt we weren't communicating effectively as it aligned with the specific directorate. Because each directorate has its own rules and regulations, and
Yep.
making sure that you're following those rules and regulations are very key.
Yep.
Um, Meticulous comb through, added some new pizzazz to it, I guess you could say, put it in again, and then it was just like boom, just not quite good enough for funding.
Ugh.
um, So that particular project and idea is currently sleeping. I'm not going to say like it's done, but we
But
we might have put it in like an echo
resting.
chamber. Yes, it's resting. Uh, so it can
I do
incubate.
believe there's a thing. I do believe there's a thing, Terrell, as a researcher. You know how farmers like let their fields lie fallow after
Mhm.
they've harvested for a while, and
Yes,
that like regenerates the soil. I
yes,
think that there's something about like letting ideas lie fallow, and
yes.
because I've definitely had experiences where I've kind of like been pushing a paper or a project or an idea, and it just isn't landing. And then like I'll come back to it in 5 years or 2 years or whatever, and I'm like, aha, now's the moment. Here's the opportunity. Like, because you meet a partner, I don't mean romantic partner, like for my work, like a school partner.
Hmm.
Um, and you're like, aha, you would be perfect place for this idea I had 5 years ago. So
Yes.
that can happen. Those like kismet things. So putting it to bed is the right idea, I think.
And I think we just need to like save that right quick. Put it to bed. Let it fallow. 'Cause, that might be one
Okay.
of those key things that pops up at some point in time.
Yeah,
You know how we add a
that's
little
good.
spice to
That's
it.
good. That's good. A little spice. A little spice. So like I said in my intro before Terrell did our title drop, we interviewed other people for this episode because we didn't just want it to be Terrell's experience and my experience. We wanted to broaden a little bit. So who did you interview, Terrell?
So I got the chance to interview Eric Wiebe. Eric is a professor in STEM education at North Carolina State University and a senior research fellow at the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation. Um, Eric, as a senior full professor, has served as PI and co-PI on numerous NSF grants. When I was interviewing and talking to Eric, he was even telling me that some of his first grants predated DRK-12 in its
Wow.
official title, but was part of the directorate that led to the DRK-12 space. So it was just super exciting to really talk to him about the longevity of his career and his experiences in pursuing grants and starting research and getting rejected and how he responds to it. How about you, though? Who did you talk to?
I interviewed a friend who is also at my university, so it was a very easy interview. My friend, Professor Melissa Gresalfi, who's a professor of learning sciences at Vanderbilt with me. And her research looks at how people's experiences in the world influence who they become, like how they act and what they think about themselves and how others come to see them. So these questions of identity. Um, for most of her career, she's focused on students in schools or children out of schools around issues of STEM engagement. So she's looked at STEM engagement in video games, textile art, and classrooms and so on. So she's had a steady stream of NSF funding throughout her career. And I think she got her doctorate sometime in the early 2000s. So she's been pretty consistently funded by NSF, although like Eric, not always in DRK-12. And she has some interesting insights about how DRK-12 itself has evolved over time.
So, in talking to Eric and Melissa,
Mhm.
we were having the opportunity to, prime them with regards to conversations about rejection. But of course, in order for someone to actually get rejected, they have to write an NSF proposal. Um,
Right.
and so when you were talking to Melissa, what were some of the conversations you all were having around like the NSF proposal writing process? I know for me,
Yes.
when I think about my process, there's all these mechanics to which directorate do I want to apply to?
Mhm.
What's the key story that we're trying to feature and, so on and so forth there. But I'd be really curious just to kind of hear how you all were talking about that.
Yeah. So a lot of Melissa's work is exploratory. She's like I said, she's looked at like how kids learn when they're playing video games that have STEM components to them or textile art and so on. So she's done a lot of really interesting exploratory things. So she's also applied all over NSF. And when she's building a grant, she says that she usually starts with, sometimes she starts with an idea and sometimes she starts with a team.
Mhm.
And the current DRK-12 grant she has, which is actually her first DRK-12 grant, is a collaborative one that she's doing with Anita Wager, who's also at Vanderbilt, and Amy Noel Parks, who's at Michigan State University. And they kind of came together as a team first. Like they were hanging out and like, it'd be fun to study something together, and talking about their interests and sort of where their research is currently at. They came up with this idea about learning math through play in early grades. So that was like the first part, is building the team, and then they had to find a partner. And in the climate that we're in right now, trying to find a kindergarten classroom that is willing to kind of put assessments and standardized testing aside, um, in the service of exploring how play can support kids and their mathematical learning, that was hard. And especially because the team was really committed to trying to find a school that served a working class and community, or a community that where maybe some of the students are in poverty. So they wanted to give kids an opportunity for agency and fun in learning, who may not typically have that as part of their school experience. So that combination meant that it was like a 6-month process just to find the partners. So that was like some of the stuff she said before the writing even started.
Wow. No, that's really interesting because, sometimes as a junior scholar, you feel like you have to come into this process with everything laid out. Like,
Right.
oh, I have to have the idea and it has to have
Mhm.
all of the key features and it has to answer all of the issues. And then it's like, oh, do I need to do this by myself or with a team? But it sounds like, for Melissa, one of her key things was really trying to be intentional around
Right.
building the right team, building the right support system, recognizing that for her projects specifically, the idea could be amazing, but if the team wasn't what it needed to be, uh,
Right.
it might not flourish appropriately.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what you have to be able to convince people when you write your proposals, is that you have the right team, right? And you have the right context to do the work. I've seen really good ideas not come together. I mean, we're kind of calling back the last episode we did, but I think that that's a really core part of developing a proposal, is making sure that all those ducks are in a row.
I would agree. And even as I was talking to Eric, who again in STEM education has done a lot of research related to like K-12 instructional settings, thinking about the integration of technology within these spaces. How do you innovate instructional practices using technology? Talked a lot about some of those very similar concepts in terms of going into the grant writing process and wanting to make sure that there was a core team, the quote unquote right team, who would
Mhm.
really be able to help ensure that the project was able to be successful. And, for Eric, one of the biggest things wasn't necessarily did the person have such and such technical expertise when it came to the grant or the project, although, the diverse expertise was necessary. But for him, it was more so about their thought process and how
Interesting.
intellectually they could contribute to the design of the project and the design of the study, recognizing that sometimes some of his greatest partners were even outside of the more traditional educational sciences space,
Oh,
or
that's
even
interesting.
some of the
Like, just did he
technological
give an
sciences.
example? Did he
Yeah,
give an
so
example?
one of the examples that he talked about was a mentor slash like co-PI for some of his earlier grants was actually in English, who focused on rhetoric. And he was talking about how in partnering with this person and being mentored with this person, it was learning the technical skills of writing and how to
Oh,
communicate and how to tell a story. And that form of expertise was very beneficial for him as a junior scholar, learning how to write grants, but even more importantly, learning how to be able to truly communicate, the ideas and those key concepts and those driving points that help make a project fundable to an actual panel.
That's interesting. That's really
No, it
interesting.
definitely was, because I mean, speaking for myself, I don't want to speak for anybody else. I don't know if I've ever really considered, what it would mean to work with somebody in the humanities in that kind of capacity. Not to say, oh, come teach me your ways for writing,
Yeah.
but to
Yeah.
actually collaborate in a way where our shared conceptualization, creates a really great project, but in the same time, I'm being mentored based off of their skills and expertise, and hopefully vice versa. I'm able to mentor them based off of my
Sure.
skills and expertise.
Like a mutual learning situation.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, when I'm thinking about putting together teams, I like to have like complementary expertise, so that, where there's like a really productive intersection,
Hmm.
but where it's going to be kind of clear like what people's lanes are.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And that can get tricky. But I think that that is also like a way to make a case that we kind of need all these people, and there's not like a lot of redundancy built into the expertise of the team.
I would agree. Because depending on the nature of the project, somebody may not only have to lead one particular aspect of the design or one particular aspect of the research,
Hmm.
but again, going back to our last episode, that form of expertise then helps bring in that foundational base of research literature that
Right.
helps ensure that the ideas being proposed are in line with what the field has been discussing. The methodological practices are in line with, how they're supposed to be implemented. And so by having those different forms of technical expertise, you're ensuring the robustness of your project overall. And like you said, it's complementing each other, hopefully not overlapping to the point where they're
Yeah.
infighting and stuff like that.
Yeah. 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 Can I ask you something else about Eric? Like, what that interests me is, you said he's a part of, he's a senior fellow at the Friday, is it the Friday Institute?
Yes, for educational innovation.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a really interesting place to be writing grants from as well, right? Because presumably that's the kind of place where, like, it's a grant getting place, right? So you
Mhm.
have like this sort of, I don't know, bullpen of folks who have different expertise, and they're all kind of hustling for grants together,
Mhm.
which is a really different environment than like where I work, which is more traditional university setting.
Mhm.
So like I have to do a lot more like, pulling in, and it's not like it's hard work, but there's
Right.
just not this sort of set expectation that we're all on funded projects all the time, not to the same extent that I think it is, in a place like Friday Institute. I assume it is. I don't know. Did he talk about that at all, about using the Institute as a resource?
He didn't really go into a lot of conversation about, the work within the institute versus the work within the department. Uh,
Oh, okay.
But I mean, from what I know of the Friday Institute, and like you said, some of these other research center type spaces, there
Yeah.
is a different culture and expectation that's set with regards to, the grant writing and having a lot of grant writing to fund a lot of
Right.
employees of this space or a part of the salaries of the
Exactly.
employees in the space. And that does create a different atmosphere, not just from oh, are we constantly thinking and talking about grants, but I think it also creates a different atmosphere from the support mechanism
That's what I was thinking too.
in terms of like the resources that you have open and available to you, or the kind of infrastructure that's in place to really support the grant writing process.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Okay, cool.
But I mean, I think in sort of diving deeper into this grant writing process, recognizing that both Melissa and Eric were very keen to talk about this idea of starting a project by either thinking about starting with the core idea and moving forward, or starting with building a robust team and moving forward. Um, was there anything that Melissa said to you or in your conversation about like when they actually made the decision to apply for a grant, or, if there was a
Yeah.
space in which she wished she would have started earlier or later,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. She said that early in her career, she thinks that she waited too long. She thought she had to have things all figured out before she applied for grants. And it was only somewhere along the way she had a insight of like, wait a minute, I just need to explain what I'm trying to figure out. I don't have to have it all figured out. And that was like a really key insight for her. The other thing that she said was really helpful in terms of her own development as a scholar was being a co-PI on other people's grants. And actually, she says this really well. So instead of summarizing, I'm going to just cut into what she says and how she recommends that people apprentice to the whole NSF process by working as co-PI. So here's Melissa talking about that. I think that it's hard to imagine and conceptualize putting all the pieces together in a coherent way if you don't really understand the component parts. So I do think that the idea of being a co-PI and trying to take that sort of role is a good idea.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, Lonnie, but once you're a PI on a grant, an unfortunate chunk of your time is spent on administering the grant, right? And like very unpleasant things that have to do with
lots of bureaucracy.
Yeah, exactly. And so, especially if you're pre-tenure, like don't waste your time with those things. And if you're co-PI, you're going to help out,
Sure.
but you're responsible for those. So it's both an opportunity to be mentored through the system. It's also an opportunity to not have to be burdened with all the logistics of it. So it is amazing. When I was at Indiana University, that's where I started. I had a chance to work with a lot of senior folks who were amazing, with Sasha Barab and Dan Hickey. And those folks were running the grants, and like they sort of apprenticed me into the project and let me work on it. And I had my own line of research in those grants. And so it was invaluable. And I think, hopefully it would be ideal if everyone had that kind of mentoring, because it is really useful.
So Terrell, you're the junior person here. Have you been a co-PI on anybody's grant?
yes, that's actually how I got my start to NSF.
Okay.
I was fortunate. Actually, that's actually how I got my start to grant writing more
Okay.
broadly. So when I came into University of Missouri, Columbia, Mizzou, I had the opportunity to serve as co-PI on 2 foundation-funded grants.
Nice.
One through the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and one through the Lumina Foundation. And
Okay.
in both spaces, I had the opportunity to learn with the team in terms of how to think about grant writing, how to structure a strong grant proposal. I had the opportunity to actually take leadership over aspects of the grant. So while I wasn't responsible for the full administration of the project, there was a small slice of the project that I was assigned some responsibility to. And I think that that was really good as a starting point for this process, because one, you get the behind the scenes in terms of the writing and the
Yeah.
talking with the team and how all of the ideas can be pulled together to create the project. But then as the project is being implemented, it's almost like the dipping your toe into the pool to check the temperature before
Right.
diving head first in. I got the chance to be responsible, to administer, to engage, and to see how other senior leaders would actually administer a full research project.
Yeah.
And if you're allowed to like whisper on podcast, I would whisper and say, I learned some things of what to do and what not to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, honestly, we all have our different kind of styles too, right? Like some people really like to just kind of go out there and explore, and some of us need a little more structure than that, right? And so No, I think it is an opportunity to learn what not to do. And I don't think that's a whisper thing. Like, I assume that my mentees are also figuring out, like, wow, Lonnie's super uptight about that. And I don't think she needs to be, or wow, she's too loosey goosey about that. And I need like a little more, whatever. And I'm fine with that, like, variation. I think that there's lots of ways to do good research, and hopefully my way is just one of the ways. So anyway, but what did Eric tell you about his writing process once he had his idea and he had his team? Like, what kinds of stuff does he do, like, once that's all settled?
Yeah. So he gave away his secret sauce in terms
Oh,
of the writing. And I kind of had to twist his arm virtually. I was like, yeah, you got to really let us know some of
yeah.
the ideas. But one of his secret sauces for the writing, and, just going to quote this, he said that he would have, or he would make sure as a team that their first 2.5 pages told a solid story with the
Interesting.
entirety of the research project. And their logic behind it was in that getting a full scope of the project within those first 2.5 pages, you were able to almost build from it like an abstract and go into each section a little more in-depthly for the rest of the written proposal. And it gives the reviewers the opportunity to see what the idea is early, and to see kind of how all of the pieces are coming together early in the actual grant writing, the actual written grant, so that then as more questions were developed, hopefully, some of those questions would then be answered through the remaining of the proposal.
I wonder if he learned that from the rhetoric person.
I think to me, it sounds like that would be a strong writing technique.
Yeah,
So I wouldn't be
exactly.
surprised if he learned it from the rhetoric person.
Yeah, because it seems like that allows you to sort of set the context. And
Yes.
that's one of the tricky things that I find writing grants is, like, what goes where, and like, when do you like fully explain something, and when do you just kind of put a little pin in it for later. So that seems like a really smart strategy.
It
Ooh.
is, in my opinion. And then for him, and I'll actually let him tell this particular portion, liking this idea that you said about setting the context, so wanting to emphasize that, um, it was a matter of ensuring then that the panel would get really excited about their idea. And so cutting to Eric to talk about this, he's going to tell us.
You have to get someone on the panel excited, right?
Mhm.
Someone
Mm.
says, wow, this is a great idea. And that person then has to advocate for you, because there are probably a half dozen other really strong proposals in there. And if you don't have someone on the inside advocating for you, you aren't going to make the cut. It doesn't matter how good your proposal is, right? So that really interesting idea, needs to catch somebody's eye or multiple people's eyes. And then you just have to have a solid proposal. You have to check all the boxes, right?
Mhm.
You can't have any major missteps in terms of budget or experimental design or context in which you're going to be doing the work. It may not be these things may not be non-starters for everyone in the panel,
Mhm.
but if it really, similarly, you need to get someone excited about it. You also can't get anyone pissed off, right? If you get someone pissed off on the panel, it's like, what the hell do they think they're doing running this experiment? This design is no good, right? And
Right.
it may not completely sink it, but it's so competitive that if it just pulls it down a notch or two,
Mhm.
influences a couple other scores to go from, say, excellent to very good or very good to good, it's like,
Yeah.
you just aren't going to make it. So
Wow, that was some realness there.
No, it definitely was, because if I think about, again, his strategy for ensuring that he sets the context and
Mhm.
flushes this out the proposal to ensure that there aren't any major missteps, it is this idea of your review panel has to get excited about the
Yeah.
idea. And you do kind of have to have these champions back there saying, not only is this study very robust and logical in its construction, but the ideas proposed are ones that are really helping push the intellectual merit out here, and can have a significant broader impact on the field.
That's really cool. I mean, in some ways, like Eric's comment and the secret sauce and everything, it's sort of proving a point that Melissa said too. She said that in her career, writing journal articles hasn't gotten a lot easier for her, but writing grants has, because of the way that they're so structured. And just that the prescribed slots, the knowing what the page limit is, that maybe she hasn't articulated as explicitly as Eric did with his secret sauce, but she feels like she knows what needs to happen in each of those sections. And she's also probably, like Eric, served on a lot of review panels. So she's seen from the other side too, being a grant reader and reviewer. So that's always a really good form of professional development that we can't endorse enough here.
And I know it sounds difficult. I guess difficult might not be the right word, but I know that it sounds like, I don't even want to say cliche, but it's one of those things where it's like, be a reviewer to learn the inside process.
Right.
Be a
Right.
reviewer to learn the inside process.
Right.
While you're giving of your time, recognizing that time is so precious right now, given, you know, how we're navigating our current circumstances, our own individual, professional, and personal lives and careers. Be a reviewer to learn the inside process, because there's so many things that you get exposed to in reviewing that, in my opinion, really helps you understand more of the mechanistic structure behind grant writing, specifically for NSF, and just how conversations can transpire on panels that can then lead to these ideas of like setting the context or including a logic model or making sure that you have tables and figures and
Right.
like that.
Yeah. And the other thing Melissa pointed out, probably like a fruit of her experience, is just how important the evaluation component is. And, you know, I think she's worked on lots of different kinds of projects. So I think that the evaluation question is always a little bit different every time. You have to either get a formal evaluator if you're doing that kind of a grant where that's appropriate. And if you do get a formal evaluator, she really emphasized how important it was to try to get somebody whose expertise in evaluation has matches the data that your project's going to be generating. Just because someone, you know, I don't know if you've gotten these emails, Terrell, but like sometimes when it's NSF DRK-12 season, I'll get like these, hey, I'm an educational evaluator, you can write me into your grant, kind of emails. So you want to make sure that that person's experience actually fits with your project. But if you're not doing an evaluator like that model, you know, if you're using an advisory board model, which is what most of my grants have, you need to have lead time for that. You need to make sure you get that complementary expertise in there, especially if you're doing something a little more bold. You want to reassure the reviewers that you're gonna have the advice and guidance that you need.
Right.
And you can't just go for like the famous people in your field, right? You have to know the field well enough so that you're not asking the same people who get 50 other requests every proposal season. So that's one of the things she also talked about with the planning that she's learned over the years, is really making sure that evaluation component is strong.
Wow. So, you know, I think about it, we've set the context.
Right.
You know, Melissa and Eric have given us some phenomenal introductory quotes to like their grant writing process,
Right.
and, you know, some of the tips and tricks that they've learned and advice that they would provide. But I think now we want to get to the juicy part.
The sad part.
Yes,
Do
well, I
the
mean, I guess
violin.
well, I guess I did rub my hands kind of maniacally because I was like, "Ooh, this is
Yeah, you did.
hard,"
Yeah,
and
you
you're like,
did.
"No, let's play the violin because it's a little." But you know, the emotional part that humanizes people,
Yeah,
because as far as I know, this is, you know, we're still people, biological organisms. I don't know if there are any
absolutely. I
professors that are
am.
full on AI robots yet.
Oh gosh. Ah. Oh my gosh.
But we get rejected. And
We
how do
get
we respond to
rejected.
it?
How do we respond to rejection?
And so when I
So,
was talking to Eric,
yeah.
you know, it was interesting to hear him kind of process his rejection experiences. One of the things that he had shared is like if he were to look over his NSF or just grant writing success slash rejection rate, he would say that he would fall in about 1 to 4 proposals actually being funded, which is like
One
what,
out of
25%?
four.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a 25% success rate,
Yeah,
which
that's
meant a
sounds about right.
75% rejection rate. Uh, and so the way that he was talking about it to me was just interesting and fascinating because, you know, I'm not going to say I'm not a big math person. Math is not my expertise in terms of my subject domain. Excuse me,
Thank you
mathematics.
for thank you for
Mathematics.
that. Because I would have gotten on you about that. So I appreciate that
Yeah.
deference.
Yes, yes, yes. But if we were to be comparing 25% to 75%, mathematically 75% outweighs the 25%.
That's a significant difference. I don't even need to run any tests to tell you that. Yeah.
Um, and so it was like he got more rejections than he had successes. And there were some experiences that he had earlier on where, like, as an early career scholar, kind of reflecting on it and giving advice to early career scholars, that I think is very key. And so I want to cut to Eric really quick in this quote that I find to be really key.
Our larger team will typically, you know, as soon as somebody gets those review panels, we'll dive in right away. We'll do the post-mortem. We'll decide, you know, at least make an initial assessment whether this idea is completely dead in the water and we just need to walk away from it, or whether it warrants further work, and then maybe put some things on the calendar a month or two out to start working on it. I would say, as a more junior faculty who most likely have not thickened their skin quite as much, I wouldn't do anything with that. I would look at it, give it a brief overlook, read the summary, maybe look at the individual scores from individual panelists, and then I would just file it away for 48 hours. Go and rant and rave with your colleagues and loved ones, get out of your system, have a glass of wine, whatever your choice of relaxation is. And then a couple of days later, when everything's going to calm down a little bit, then go in and do that the best you can, that dissection. And this is where it helps if you've had a more senior individual either helping on the proposal or a mentor who would be willing to at least skim your proposal and then read those reviews and help you unpack what seems to be being communicated in those reviews. Because one, you may not be able to see it because of an emotional veil that's over you. Like all you want to do is say, those idiots, what the hell is their problem? You know, or it just could be that you just haven't had enough experience to kind of read between the lines and say, oh, that's what's going on here. That's what they may be saying this, but what they really don't like is X, you know. And then you sum that up. And again, it's sort of like when you get a manuscript back, you say, all right, is this salvageable? Or do we walk away from this? And sometimes you really do just need to walk away from it There are definitely some ideas I should have walked away from sooner. And there are other ones I'm really glad I hung in there. And that's where it's a little hard to give advice on. You got to look deep and say, geez, how important is this to me?
And so when I think about that quote from Eric, there were so many different key pieces of information to responding to rejection. One, logically, strategically, when you first get those reviews back, do you as a team dive in and automatically start planning to move forward? Or do you take time to acknowledge the emotional responses associated with being rejected, where you may just close that email, walk away from your computer, find whatever outlet of release you have, be it talking to a significant other or talking to your best friends or going for a walk or, getting a glass of wine or particularly something stronger, just depending on your flavor, to allow yourself to grieve, because there is this grieving process, I think, that's
Yeah.
associated with being rejected.
I mean, if you think about the kind of legwork that they're talking about putting into grants and that we put into grants, 6 months of finding the right teaching site, research partner rather, the putting together of a team and the hours spent writing and planning and revising and putting together all your references and designing, and that's a lot of work. So to just have it get shut down, I don't know that there's anybody who doesn't have a little moment of, dang, that wasn't what I was hoping for. Unless you really didn't want to do the project, but then why did you write the grant? So
Good question.
I really liked how he described the emotional veil and sort of knowing where you are. Like, am I going to be able to read this for what it is, or am I just going to hate read it right now and just be mad? And you can do that, but you're not going to be doing your best analysis of where did I miss, if that's the kind of mood you're in. I also think that the question of when it's worth persisting and when you need to walk away, that's a really good question. And I personally think that's where colleagues can be really helpful, because I've had this more with journal articles than with grants, where I felt like, man, this thing got rejected and I feel like it's a good idea. So I'll pull in a senior person and explain what the reviews were and what I was trying to do. And those moments of cheerleading or kind of talking me down, those are really pivotal. And our senior colleagues know the field, they know what's up, they know what needs to happen, and that can be really valuable. It's interesting also to think about the connections between what Eric said and what Melissa told me. I mean, she also, like all of us, talked about the initial sadness of getting that email. But her big thing that she was talking about, and I'll let her say this in her words, is about the importance of not keeping the rejection to herself. So let me turn it over to Melissa.
I think the most important thing I learned is to not keep the rejection to yourself. Because first of all, the more you tell your stories, I'm really upset, this thing didn't happen, the more you hear other people's stories.
Right.
And, now I know that we all get lots of rejections. It's actually just part of academia.
That's right.
But we tend not to talk about those things as much. And especially when I was first a new professor, social media wasn't really a thing in the way it is now. And so I didn't even have that, right? But still just in the hallway, people aren't like, gee, got that journal article rejected again. So talking to other people about it was helpful. A, because they share their stories with you, and B, because they give you advice. And then I almost always, once I've sort of gotten over my sadness, I don't just talk to the program officer, I ask friends and colleagues to read my proposal. And usually I ask them to read it before I submit it the first time, but then to help me process the feedback. And this is the same of anything. If you want to keep doing the work, you have to come up with a strategy to not get beaten down by by rejection. And for me, talking to other people, creating a network of friends and colleagues where you do read each other's work, you give each other advice, is really helpful. It makes the work stronger, and it's also sustaining, right? You want that person who's gonna like just go out for a glass of wine with you or whatever it is, to be like, that sucks. Right. You were so excited about that. I'm so sorry.
Right.
And so that for me has been the most useful way to process and then sort of recover, is to find that group of people. One of the things that has helped me is to start to learn to separate negative feedback about my ideas from negative feedback about their execution. And I guess for me, that has to do with whether I think getting rejected is a commentary on my self-worth. And it's easy, I think, to think, and I mean, this still is my feeling, even though I've been a professor for a long time. Like, I knew I couldn't do this, right? Like the first time I get, when I get something rejected, my feeling is, I knew I was no good at this, even though I can say there are other metrics that I could call upon to say, like, maybe I can be a professor, right? But I still have that same first reaction. It's like, it's confirming everything I always knew. And I think before I got tenure, for example, there were other times when that feeling might have lasted longer.
Yeah.
But even then, I had to learn to separate. Somebody didn't like this grant does not mean that your ideas are not worthwhile or that you're not a good researcher, right? Even if it turns out that other people read your grant and they're like, yeah, that wasn't the best grant, that's just the writing, right? It's not you. And especially as a new scholar, these things are hard. It's a hard genre. You have to convince someone that you can do this project that you actually haven't done yet. And
so she's talking a lot there about, especially the perspective of a junior scholar. How did that land with you, Terrell?
Yeah, I mean, as I was listening to what Melissa was sharing, there was so many things that were hitting home to me. One, this idea that the rejection is about the writing and not necessarily about you. And I think that as, junior scholars, early career scholars, we've either just defended our dissertation, which for graduate school is the pinnacle of your success, but from a professional experience is just the beginning. Right. And so it's like, now you're back at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Yeah. You really want to work your way up. You want to establish yourself. You want to prove yourself. And then if I think even more specifically to the tenure process for those who are on tenure track, is one of those things where you have to demonstrate that your scholarship is independent and that is focused and that you can stand on your own leg as a scholar. And so it's as you're putting these ideas out there, not only are you really excited about these ideas because you've been incubating them for however, but they're a reflection of you and your own motivation and your own drive and the desire to really be established. And so then to have it rejected, it does feel like a personal rejection at times. It does feel like the imposterism that Melissa was describing. Did I make the right decision? Can I actually be successful in this field? Is this field cut out for me? And I can think about, those emotions that I've had in going through the rejection process and, whether this is healthy or not, putting myself out there on the line. There was this journal article that got rejected that I was really, really unhappy with how the rejection was. And so to this day, I have a printed copy of that rejection, and it's posted right in front of my computer in a sense. And I can look at it and I can go and I can reflect on what that emotional experience was like and having it rejected, the sadness, the anger, the frustration that I experienced post that rejection. But then I can actually go and look at the article in publication because it did actually get published in a different space.
So it's sort of just reminding yourself, this is part of the process, right? By having that so visible in your workspace, you're kind of normalizing and desensitizing yourself to the crushing feeling of imposter syndrome that we all have had at one time or
Mhm.
another, right? I think imposter syndrome is really fascinating.
Mhm.
You know, I have like 5 thoughts about what you just said, and one of them is just how interesting imposter syndrome is, and I've heard people talk about it as like like a structural thing.
Mhm.
You know, you're a Black man, I'm a white woman, like, do we belong here is a
Mhm.
question that we have to ask ourselves probably more than some other folks do. And you know, that imposter syndrome brings out that like stereotype threat.
Yes.
um and so these moments, I think it's real easy for that vulnerability to come out, and
Yes.
recognizing it as just that we're in this system where we're positioned in such a way that
Yes.
our rejection might be experienced as evidence of us not being worthwhile is
Yes.
like an important perspective to have. The other thing I think, and this is just sort of my theory of time, you know how when you're little, like summer vacation feels so long and you can't believe how long it is,
Yes.
right? I believe we experience time in proportion to our age. So now that I'm like half a century old plus, like a summer's not that long. It's like, boop, well, that was summer. Okay. Because I have this much longer like timeline to compare
Mhm.
that 1, 2 or 3 month period to. And I think there's something like that too with rejection, like the way you were describing the timeline that you've kind of reminded yourself about through these artifacts. Like,
Mhm.
okay, yep, this was time 1. It got rejected and that felt like crap. But here it is, this journal article that I'm proud of and I think is awesome. And that's just part of the deal. But
Mhm.
that first time you get that rejection letter,
Yes.
ouch,
Ouch.
ouch, 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 because you don't have that sense of proportion. You don't have that longer experience to compare it to. When I think of how it feels right now, opening those NSF, like, sorry, your grant did get funded,
Mhm.
compared to how it did the first time, it's
Mhm.
not even the same experience anymore.
Wow.
And some of that might be my own maturity, some of that may be my own like growth as a human being, but I think some of it is just the gray hairs on my head, like I'm just like,
The signs of
yeah,
wisdom.
yeah, it's part of the deal. And like, Eric was saying, you don't know who's going to be on the panel. You don't know if you're going to have someone who gets what you're up to. And your job is just to sort of pick up the pieces and decide where to go next.
Yes. And I would say, I think the other thing that really hit hard for me in part of Melissa's response was going back to something that we actually opened with, and this concept of the team. Uh,
Yeah.
and even though, her talking about the team this time wasn't like the research team, it was like about her mentoring team or her mentoring village, or
Right.
that social cultural capital that she
Right.
really draws on to help sustain and ensure that her well-being is present because of the heavy emotional tax that you pay when you reject it. Because, like you said, the labor of love that you put into actually having the grant written, and the time and the effort and the resources. Um, and that really hit home for me because, and again, this is just me putting myself out there, so this might become Terrell's therapy moment. I don't know.
It's okay.
But it's one of those things where it's like, again, if you're in this race and you feel like you have to do it by yourself because of all of the messages that you get about what denotes success as a
Mm-hmm.
researcher, as a scholar, as a faculty member, um, it's one of those things where it's like, if I go and I speak to someone else, I'm having to be vulnerable, and I'm having to show other people, maybe people who hired me, maybe people who questioned my intelligence from the beginning, not really knowing, but you're trusting and hoping that the person or people that you're reaching out to have your best interest at heart. But it's like you have to be able to be vulnerable with somebody to say, hey, I don't know how to respond, or I don't know where to begin, or I just don't know. Can you
Yeah.
help me? And I think
Right.
that help-seeking behavior is so critical as a person, but I also think it's just very critical as a professional because it's impossible for you to know it all. It's
Right.
impossible for you to be able to take on everything. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know. I was about to go real philosophical, but please.
No, I mean, part of what you're doing, Terrell, is you're not just uncovering the hidden curriculum of DRK-12, but you're uncovering the hidden curriculum of the academy, right? Like,
Mm.
to sustain ourselves in this work, even though the mythology and the narratives that we have to put out there are about our individual success and our individual accomplishments, like, we really rely on our networks and our communities, right? If we want to sustain ourselves in this work. And one of the ways that our communities can sustain us, those trusted people who we can be vulnerable with, who we know aren't gonna, kick us while we're down or, hold hostage our vulnerable moments over us in the
Mhm.
future, who are going to be real with us, right? Like we know we need to have those people in our lives and in our world, our academic world, that we can say, gosh, I just got this rejection and I feel like terrible right now. Can
Mhm.
I talk to you about it? Can you read it for me? Can you help me make it better? Whatever we need from them. I know that's a secret to my success is that I have those people in my life that I can both process the emotional side of things with, but also the intellectual side. Like,
Mhm.
should I put this to bed and walk away, or should I keep going? And if I do, how am I going to address these issues? Like, that's real too.
Yes,
That's like my theme today. That's real. Just
that's real.
I feel like Bart Simpson, and that's like my little catchphrase. But
Well, we'll make sure to emphasize that. And
okay.
who knows, as we continue this, if you hit a "That's real," you might have a fan base that comes up with like a t-shirt, a slogan, everything else.
Yeah, that'll be our merch, right?
Yes,
For
yes.
our Patreon supporters. No, I'm just joking. We don't have a Patreon. This is all free. It's being funded by the NSF.
Being funded by the NSF. But no, it is real. And like you said, it's important to have both sets or multiple sets. Someone or some people who can help emotionally, and then people who can help intellectually. Because going back to what you said about Eric's comment on the emotional veil, um, if that veil is thick, then it's going to be really hard to actually determine what it was that triggered that review panel that made them feel as if the proposal was not strong. And it
Mhm.
actually makes me think about, some advice that I get from a very, very dear friend of mine, Dr. Monica Miles. Whenever we're writing together and we get our reviews back, one of the things that she listens for in the us reading out loud what the reviews are is what was that actual trigger word or phrase or
Interesting.
concept that prompted the panelist or the reviewer to then say, I don't think that this is as strong, or there's concerns around this particular area. And then sort of adapting that practice for myself whenever I get some reviews and I'm reading them, I am trying to see if I can identify what that trigger word or trigger phrase was that then prompted the reviewer to to come into that cycle of thoughts to generate that response. Um,
Yeah, I think that's really wise advice. And it's a really interesting and smart practice because I can tell you from my work as an editor, like sometimes you're reading all these reviews and people are kind of honing in on one aspect of an article that isn't quite coming together, but their diagnosis of what's not working may be different.
mm,
Right. And you really see it laid bare that it's like, that they have this experience of reading along and getting to that part of the article or that part of the research design and going, boop, red flag, not sure what it is, but something's not working. And one person says it's an issue of like not enough participants. And another says something about like you didn't theorize your case adequately or whatever. People are diagnosing it differently.
mhm,
But it's clear from that convergence. I mean, that's a really clear example. It's clear from that convergence that something didn't quite come together in how this was explained. The hard thing about an NSF review panel is that even though it's a consensus review, so everybody reads it, there's one lead writer who's putting together the review. So you might get the sticking point, but you may not have the multitude of perspectives of like what is going on. The good thing about that consensus process is that the one person who says you need more participants and the other person who says you need to theorize your case better, they can hash it out and maybe come up with a suggestion that goes in your rejection, your review. But sometimes they still may not have it totally right. So that's where it becomes your job, and your colleagues that support you can help you with the job of trying to uncover, like, okay, so they think it had to do with this part of my research design. They said X, but I really don't think X is the problem, but there's clearly something that's setting them off, right? And to go through all of that.
And that's where those experts, those senior colleagues, those people with more experience and wisdom can really help, because they may have seen something like this before in their own experience.
Exactly.
They may have seen something like this before from reviewing on a different panel, or just, again, having another mind to process and bounce ideas off of can really help with that response to rejection, as you're now trying to strategize and determine, is this an idea that we put to bed, that we, is dead in the water, or, an idea that we bounce right back on and try to go for that very next call for proposals.
Awesome.
So, well, I think that was actually very informative and enlightening. How do you feel?
Yeah, that was super interesting. And it was like, I like sometimes when we have these conversations and I kind of know things about like where it's going because we planned it a little, but then there's these sort of unexpected insights as we talk through the details. And I definitely had that experience today. So that was a lot of fun.
Same. And if I were to try and recap for me, some of those key highlights, one, it was thinking way back at the beginning, like I make it seem like it was weeks ago, way back when.
That's because you're so young.
Yes, my time difference, right. But no, at the beginning, how in thinking about conceiving a project, there's this idea of, do you start with the idea or do you start with the team? And being very intentional either way that you go in building your team, by thinking about the expertise that people bring, but also thinking about the different perspectives that they bring, realizing that you can get people outside of your traditional space, be it science, be it mathematics, technology, engineering, education, and tap into people in English or the arts and the humanities because of their expertise. Thinking then about the mechanics of grant writing by serving as a reviewer and learning sort of some of those behind the scene, behind the curtain looks of the grant writing process and grant reviewing process, being a co-PI so that you can get your toes wet in the pool some before you dive in for a swim, to see what grant writing and grant management and reports and all of that stuff is like. And then, of course, all of the responses to the rejection and acknowledging your humanity as a person and the emotional side that comes with putting in the work and finding those people and those spaces and those activities that allow for healthy outlets of those emotions, because you can and will feel sad and angry and frustrated and happy and joyful and all of the other emotions that I can't think of right now at the moment.
Frustrated, anxious, having existential crises. Sorry, I have lots on the tip of my tongue. Go ahead.
Look, well, the imposterism, right?
Yeah.
But there's always the opportunity to have that countered through mentorship, through that community, through those different networks, so that you have those outlets and you have those trusted people that you can be vulnerable with professionally and personally, as you're now making your decisions to move forward with your life and the project and all of the other shenanigans that you might get into.
Yeah, and don't forget the program officers too, right?
Yes.
That if you're like right on that edge where like Eric was describing of goods but not very goods, and you know, like you feel like with a little boost you might get funded, that's a good time to tap a program officer once you've processed your emotions and talked to your colleagues and so on in your network, and you have a potential revision. It's a good thing to run by a program officer. They're limited in the kind of feedback they can give you, but it can nonetheless be super helpful.
Very much so. I would add, and hopefully our program officer would appreciate it, that when you do schedule that conversation with the program officer, you have some kind of structure in
That's
mind
right.
for the conversation.
Don't just be like, hey, can you help me? They're not the person you drink wine with. They're the person you go to after you've had the wine, after you've had the walk, after you've had the cry, after you've had the consultation, and you think you have a new idea. Then you go to your program officer.
Yes, yes, yes. And don't do like me the first time where I just looked up their phone number and I called my program officer and I was like, hello, I am interested in applying for a grant. And they were like, who is this?
No cold calling the program officers.
No cold calling. Please send an email and schedule an appointment.
Aren't you a millennial, Terrell?
I am a millennial.
I'm so surprised you cold called. That seems so Gen X.
Well, I mean, I can't really text, right? So.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. Got it. All right.
But
all right, friends. Well, thank you for listening to our podcast. We love sharing our ideas with you. Feel free to give us feedback, email, tweet, whatever, and we'll keep this conversation going.
Yes, yes, super excited. And be sure to tune in to episode 3, which will be coming soon.
Bye.
Take care.